Hey everybody, welcome to Life is Beautiful. I'm Anthony, and today I want to talk to you about something that I find incredibly interesting. It's probably one of my greatest adventures in beer ever. Now, some of you may know that last year I actually had the pleasure of being able to move, live, and work in Turkey for over 6 months, and it was absolutely amazing. And while I was there, I certainly had a bucket list of things I wanted to do. I wanted to see the balloons of Cappadocia. I wanted to see the ancient historical religious buildings of Istanbul, and I wanted to see the beautiful waterfalls of Pamukkale. But y'all know me. There's always some type of beer idea or thought process going around inside my skull, and this was absolutely no exception. I knew that during my time in Turkey, I had to be able to experience all the beer culture that Turkey had to offer. And the top of that bucket list was something very unique and very interesting. And it was called Boza. Now, this might not quite look like what you would expect a beer to look like. And that's because it, in the loosest sense, is a beer. What it actually is a proto-beer. It's what beer was before beer was beer. Essentially, Boza is a fermented grain beverage. It has yeast or some type of fermenting microbe in it. It has grains, particularly a type of wheat known as bulgur, often served like a rice. So the easiest way to kind of associate it with is like a wheat rice hybrid. It has water, and together they all ferment together and create an alcohol byproduct. So in the loosest definition of what a beer is, I would say it's beer. The only thing it's missing is hops, and I think we're past the point where hops have to be included into a beer for it to be considered beer. You know, if that was the case, Groot and a lot of other historical beers wouldn't be included in. So it's for all those reasons, Boza is a beer. So, fermented beverages had been brewed along Turkey's Anatolian coast for thousands of years, all the way back to 4th BC when the concept of what we now call Boza was first documented by the Akkadians who visited Anatolia, and they described a very interesting process where they would take millet or other grains and they would grind them into a fine powder, mix them with warm water, and actually bury it underground in a clay vessel for several days before being brought back up to the surface and drank. This early version of Boza was known by the Anatolians as Asiku or Arzig. It wasn't until around the 10th century BC when we started seeing the Ottoman Turks start taking over the entire area that we nowadays call Turkey, and that's when they continued on the Anatolian brewing process of making Arsiku, and they started calling it Boza. The interesting thing about that name, Boza, is some people believe it's actually the origin word, the root word for our modern day booze, which makes a lot of sense because this beer was rather strong for some of the early beverages back then, coming in at around 5% plus. Boza enjoyed a huge golden era during this time under the Ottoman Turk rule. It was one of the most popular beverages. Almost every major city had a Boza Chesi, which is a Boza producer, and it was actually so successful throughout the Caucasus and the Balkan area that it was actually used as a form of currency during this time. Unfortunately, Boza's heyday was kind of cut short due to the rising popularity of it amongst the Tartars. The Tartars were a sub-ethnic group within the same region, and the Ottomans kind of viewed them as barbaric and basically just straight up degenerates. And to be fair, they kind of were, especially when it came to their Boza consumption. They were putting a lot of other ingredients in it, particularly opium, which the Ottomans at that time were already not huge on drunkenness and alcohol consumption. So when you put modern day drugs into it, you know, they were exceptionally not happy with that. Additionally, anything that the Tartars were really into, the Ottomans were kind of against because they were seen as the enemy. So anything that they liked or enjoyed was kind of demonized, and that's why they started putting stricter, harsher restrictions on Boza production and consumption within their empire. And that lasted all the way up till 1600s when Boza was absolutely completely outlawed along with all other alcohol production within the Ottoman Empire. And this should have been the extinction event for Boza, but that outlaw, that banning was kind of loose and wasn't really strictly enforced due to Boza's popularity. And this should have been the extinction event for Boza. But because it was so popular, it continued to survive. The restrictions actually weren't that strictly enforced. In fact, a wandering scholar, only several years after this restriction occurred, noted that there were still 300 Boza chesses operating in Constantinople alone. And it's this kind of loose following of the rules that was so fortunate for us nowadays, because we're still able to see Boza in production, and we still have the history of it still to this day, all because of that very loose following of the laws. In the couple hundred years following that, Boza slowly started falling out of favor. It was kind of produced in homes, but it wasn't really to the scale, and there were no operating functional Boza chesses in Istanbul at this time around the 1900s. It had been almost completely eradicated. But it did witness one interesting reemergence. The Vefa Boza chessi opened up under the Ottoman rule, and they actually decided to create Boza in a traditional sense, but without the alcohol. That way it would be able to fit better into the strictly Islamic society. What Vefa ended up producing was drastically different than what it used to be. Now you can see this thing is thick, it's murky, it's sludgy, but that's nothing on what Vefa Boza looks like nowadays. You can see it's closer to pudding, closer to like vanilla or banana pudding than it is a recognizable drink. And additionally, it was completely non-fermented. Additionally, where classic traditional Boza has a little bit of a sour tang to it, just a touch, modern day Vefa style Boza is so freaking sweet that you could actually probably supplement it out for tapioca pudding and no one would actually really notice. And this new sweet non-alcoholic Boza was a massive success. It was so successful that traditional alcoholic Boza almost went completely extinct. Additionally, it was actually a part of the rations for the Ottoman Empire army during World War I. That's how successful and how popular and how ingrained it became in Ottoman society. And the Ottomans started forming a lot of thoughts and opinions around Boza. They saw it as essential, almost medicinal. They believed that it would give you the strength and the power and the energy to be able to overcome any opponent in battle. And women also drank it, believing that it would help improve their memories for childbirth, and it would help create a better connection with your baby because you'd be plump enough to feed it. I don't know how to say that without it coming off as creepy or offensive. But anyways, moving on, the point is that it had Boza was once again a staple in Ottoman society. It had revived itself and became a part of the culture. Now, the interesting thing is, over 100 years later, Boza is not quite looked at the same way in Turkish society. It's still a favorite drink, but around the winter time, and it's served either kind of warm, and there are a couple of fully functioning Boza chesses still in operation year-round, but they're very few and far between. Additionally, some of my Turkish friends that I made there didn't even know what it was, or they mixed it up with a salty yogurty drink known as ayran, or knew what it was and vehemently argued that it was in no way absolutely not a beer. Which, to be fair, I will concede with them on that it's not a beer. It is a Proto-Beer, but that's kind of hard to explain with that language barrier. Either way, nowadays, Boza consumption is seen closer to what I would describe as cold weather, hot beverage type of consumption. During the winter time period in the colder months, you can see different little stands popping up all around busy cities where they actually serve up Boza, and you can get it kind of warm, and they usually cover it with some cinnamon, some roasted chickpeas, and it's actually incredibly warming, even though most of it nowadays is completely alcohol free. So in conclusion, Boza is certainly one of the most interesting things I have ever encountered on my beer adventures. And I do recommend any beer lover who has a trip planned to Turkey to aggressively hunt and seek this down, because it's essentially like a missing link, a connection between what the original concept of beer was and what we have nowadays. It's not quite as thick and not quite as sludgy as what you would expect the Egyptians were, where they needed a straw to be able to drink it, but it's certainly nothing like what beer is today. It's also incredibly cool that there's still something that is being actively produced in a majority of households and in major factories that you can buy and drink and consume today that is almost a direct historical link to thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago that our ancestors were drinking. It's just kind of mind-blowing that you can just buy a bottle of basically history, you know? But I can't think of any other beer, and I will use the term beer to describe Boza because I still wholeheartedly believe it falls into that family, even if it does have the proto identifier before it. It's just, I can't think of any other type of fermented malt beverage that has a history reaching that far back. So I hope you found this video entertaining. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Most importantly, informative. Please let me know, what are your thoughts on considering this a beer? And if you wanted to learn any more about Boza or how I made this, tune in next week where I will be producing a video where we go through and we try to make Boza in a variety of different ways, following several different techniques and procedures. So it's going to be interesting. Real interesting. Anyways, hope you found it exciting. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned a little bit about beer history, and just thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Remember, there's a story in every bottle, and that life is beautiful.